What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
Guys, today we are going to be breaking down the UFC Saudi Arabia main event that just happened. We saw Nassourdine Imavov finish the former champion Israel Adesanya. The fight wasn't very long, so we're going to break down the whole thing from a technical perspective and then talk about what's potentially next for Nassourdine Imavov now having a former champion under his belt. And then we're going to address the rumors and discussions around Israel Adesanya needing to retire and whether or not we think that's the right move for him. So Nick, without further ado, let's break down, before we talk about what's coming next, let's break down what happened first and the fight itself. And I got to be honest, I mean, Izzy looked pretty good. I did see a small slowdown in his reaction time.
Yeah.
Shots that he wouldn't have normally gotten hit with. He was just a little bit slower than he normally is.
Right.
But if you look at him against other UFC fighters, he's still very sharp. His feints looked good. His slips looked good. But when you're comparing apples to apples, or in this case, comparing Izzy of today to Izzy of old, I did see a slight slowdown. I saw Nassourdine really rise to the occasion, landed that big uppercut in the first round, and then obviously took advantage of the situation in the second round there to close the show.
Yeah.
What are your technical thoughts on the fight?
Man, I loved the fight. I think that Izzy did look really good. Offensively, he was moving well, doing what he does so well, which is switching stances, throwing kicks to the body, to the head, mixing up the variety of what he was throwing. And what stuck out to me mostly about Israel's game was the defensive striking, or what he was doing to defend Imavov's striking, was the biggest chink in his armor.
Yeah.
I think his takedown defense looked pretty good. It always does. You know, he's been one of the guys that sort of taught this current wave of fighters how to defend takedowns, because everybody knew that was what they thought was his biggest weakness on his way to the belt. Well, he's very hard to get down on the ground. So Israel Adesanya showed us that he can keep the fight on the feet, and while he's striking and doing his offense, he looked just fine. But like you said, his reaction time was off. When he would slip punches or try to get out of the way of punches, it looked like he was just maybe a half a second off. And for me, I think that all comes down to the fact that the first part of the first round, was almost fought at like a sparring pace, and that's because Izzy was dictating the pace. And I believe that's because he wanted to go all 25 minutes. He wanted to keep fresh and keep Imavov at bay. But I think he made a couple of grave mistakes. And the one that stuck out to me that was the most important was after he realized he was having some success with the southpaw stance and what he was able to do with the lead hand battle and fighting the outside foot and the outside hand battle with Imavov, he was having so much success with that, and then he started to abandon it, switching stances. And I noticed very quickly in that first round, once Imavov noticed Izzy switching into orthodox, he immediately went out there and tried to land the combination that eventually did end the fight. So
yeah,
the way it worked was Imavov was sort of waiting for that moment because he knew Izzy was waiting for the long hand battle. And another aspect that people don't really think about, but Israel Adesanya is the kind of guy that loves to use his lead hand as a frame. But when you're in a fight and you have so many things to worry about, sometimes when you're switching stances, you can put the wrong hand in front and try to frame with the wrong hand. So once he stepped and switched back into his orthodox stance, he tried to frame with his backhand, and sort of it was almost like a punch, but a failed punch attempt. And that's where Imavov really found the success. I think his timing was really good. He had to figure it out in the early parts of the round, but he did find the timing of where he can throw his punch and how he needs to land it, but also on the reactions that Izzy was giving. Like I said, his reaction time was a little bit off, and his slips weren't as crisp, and I think that's because of the sparring pace that he was leading. It was only the uppercut at the very end of the first round that made Izzy realize, okay, I'm in a real fight. There's some dire consequences that are going to take place if I don't turn it up a little bit. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see much of the second round. You know, you had the eye poke that took place, and then the beginning of the end happened right after that. But I do think that Israel Adesanya was trying to keep it at that pace, and if he would have been able to stay safe, and I'm not going to blame the eye poke. I think, accidents happen in fights. It wasn't on purpose, and Izzy did have 5 minutes to take if he wanted it. He chose to get right back out there, kind of like Poatan did with Jamal Hill. But I think that those sorts of things are the reason Izzy lost this fight. Imavov rose to the occasion. He had the biggest, highest profile fighter up against him, locked in the cage, and he rose to the occasion. When you get a former champion under your belt and now you've got to win, Now you're sitting in the top 3 of the division. This is all great stuff for Nassourdine. The only problem is he's probably in one of the most stacked divisions in the UFC right now, and he's likely going to have to fight again before he gets a title shot. So after he fought Izzy this past weekend, didn't take any damage, I'd be looking to get right back on the horse and right back into competition again, because this coming weekend is the middleweight title fight between Sean Strickland and Dricus. And while Khamzat is clearly going to be the guy that gets the winner of that fight, one more win for Nassourdine Imavov, and he's kind of the next undeniable top contender.
Yeah, well, I like the fact that he lines up with the schedule of the championship fight really well, and I definitely want to get into that and what's next for Imavov. But I like what you said about the stance switching that Izzy was doing. He was having a lot of success from the southpaw. He's always had a lot of success from the southpaw. He's really good with his body kicks, and his feints looked really good. And he was getting Nassourdine to bite on a lot of them, and he was landing those body kicks, some head kicks, and some nice striking of his own.
Right.
Also, you mentioned the grappling. You know, Nassourdine went for that takedown about mid-round, and Izzy not only defended it, but then he countered it with some offensive wrestling of his own, and ended up with the better part of that exchange. Also, when Nassourdine hit him with that uppercut, Izzy responded really well. He bit down on his mouthpiece, kind of shelled up, and then landed a hook, I think it was, and maybe even an uppercut of his own. But it was a 2-punch combo that he landed after he was hit with that uppercut. So, to me, Israel showed a lot of good things. I do think switching to orthodox too much when he was having success in the southpaw was a problem for him.
Right.
I do think he was fighting at a little bit slower pace, and his reaction wasn't that good. And is that just that he wasn't really, we saw in the Sean Strickland fight, he just was a step behind. He wasn't really there.
Right.
Is that a sign that Izzy's getting older and he just doesn't have it how he used to have it anymore? Or was it a flaw in the game plan? Or maybe he just wasn't all there? I can't really say. But he did show some really good moments in round 1, and I actually personally think he won round 1.
Yeah.
The grave mistake to me was the wave off of the eye poke.
Yeah.
We talk about Izzy being the master of managing range. He's always at a range where seemingly he can hit you and you can't hit him.
Right.
And it's been really frustrating for his opponents throughout his entire career. But in this particular situation, he was blinking off the eye poke a couple times. He touched his eye and he was like, no, I'm good. But if you look back at that, Nassourdine didn't take a step back.
Right.
Neither did Izzy. So when the ref called the fight back on, Nassourdine was at an advantageous range where he could hit Izzy with that straight, and that's immediately what he threw.
Right.
So I think Izzy, being the veteran he is, I was surprised to see him make that mistake. Now, you don't need to take the full 5 minutes. If you got eye poked and you just need to blink a few times and compose yourself, that's fine. But at minimum, take a few seconds and reset.
Right.
Walk around the cage a minute and then let the referee set you back up at a place where both of you are at a neutral range, not where you're, right in range and susceptible to being hit.
Right.
It was, a lot of people were saying he was trying to have his Poatan moment, but here's the big thing, the big difference between Poatan and Izzy. Poatan's was a groin strike, and obviously any of us that have ever trained, at some point in time we've been kicked in the groin, and it's one of the worst things ever.
Right.
But it doesn't cloud your vision or your depth perception.
Right.
You're just in pain.
Right.
And I think the Poatan one was like almost on the inside of the groin, not necessarily a direct hit, if you know what I mean. So, but with Izzy, it was an eye poke. And so his vision and his distance, depth perception and everything was compromised, even though it was for only a short period of time. I think that I would have loved to have seen him take 30 seconds, take a minute. Don't take the full 5 if you don't need it. That annoys me too when fighters are like, it's barely an eye poke or barely a groin strike and they just need a rest, and so they take a full 5 minutes. Don't do that if it's not necessary. Take 30 seconds, take a minute, reset in a different part of the cage, reset at a distance that's neutral, and then go back to business. It was a big mistake by Izzy, and it cost him the fight. But moving forward now, I think I'm kind of foreshadowing as to what my opinion is on Izzy, needing to retire because he looked good in the fight against the top 5 guy and he made a mistake. That happens. But before we talk about that, let's talk about next for Nassourdine, because I like what you said as well about him, being active, because we all know that Khamzat Chimaev is very likely going to fight the winner of Sean Strickland versus DDP.
Right.
So that kind of puts Nassourdine as odd man out. But he did just get a win, the biggest win of his career, and a finish over a former champion. So he's now in the discussion. He's on deck, to use a baseball terminology.
Right.
So what can he do? he can see when that next fight against, whoever shakes out between DDP and Sean, see when that fight with Khamzat gets lined up and try to keep yourself on the same schedule.
Right.
So let's say it's early summer, let's say it's midsummer, try to be on the same card. If that doesn't happen, try to be on one before or one or two after. That way you're right in line with that, because I don't think anybody would really push back on a Nassourdine Imavov title shot if he were to win one. Now he's got the win over Izzy. If he were to win one more against a top contender in the division, and then he would be up next against the winner of Khamzat versus whoever wins out of Sean versus DDP. That's kind of what I'd like to see for Nassourdine. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think Nassourdine definitely will find himself in a title fight soon. And if I'm him, I would do this. And I know there's 0% chance that this is going to happen or that it would even be beneficial for him. But as far as stealing headlines, I would do this if I was Nassourdine. The fight is next weekend. It's in Australia. I don't know if Khamzat's weighing in as a backup, but I'd say I didn't take any damage. If the UFC wants to pay me to come weigh in as an alternate, I'll come do it. That automatically kind of puts you in that spot. Now, I don't think he would take Khamzat's number one contender shot and the guarantee of his getting the next title shot. But if he shows up and something happens and Khamzat's not there to weigh in and he does weigh in and he fought last weekend, and look, obviously
he could have his Khamzat Chimaev moment.
Right. And this stuff doesn't happen, right?
No.
Like, even though Imavov won the fight, he is medically not cleared to fight right now. Things can change. You can make stuff happen if you absolutely have to. I don't see that being the case. I'm sure they already have it all set up. But if I were him, I'd hop on Twitter and drop that right out into the world and let the world just let it go viral, because I think the most important thing Imavov can do right now is strike while the iron's hot. That's why I think he needs to fight as soon as possible. Go ahead and just keep stacking your wins up, because you don't know what's going to happen in the division. You don't know if these fights are going to be competitive and then all of a sudden we're going to need a trilogy, or,
God forbid,
right?
We get a trilogy, DDP and Strickland trilogy.
Right. Well, 85's humming along, but yeah, there's so many good competitors in the division that we just need to see some new faces get out there and get after it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that Imavov does definitely have a great chance at stealing a lot of fans and stealing a lot of thunder from other rising 185ers. But when it comes down to what I think Israel should do next.
Guys, before we finish up this video, I want to talk about the fact that most of you that watch our content are not subscribed to the channel.
What's up with that?
Guys, we are on a mission to get to 10,000 subscribers. If you enjoy the content, a subscribe goes a long way as far as helping us out. Now let's get back to the conversation.
Thank you. I am totally against the retirement bandwagon for Israel Adesanya.
Right.
He's 1-4 in his last 5 fights. Yes. But he had great rounds, great moments in every one of those. And the one that he won was against Alex Pereira.
And he starched him.
Nobody else does that. So nobody else in the UFC does that. But I think that Israel Adesanya is kind of past the point where he needs to worry about title fights. He doesn't need to worry about becoming the champ again. And he also doesn't need to worry about the top 5 contenders, because he's already beaten them. Most of them he's beaten twice. Izzy is in that rare air that Conor McGregor found himself in, where every fight he's in is almost a title fight, even though it's because it's going to be a main event or it's going to be a high profile fight. So Izzy's at that point now where he doesn't have to climb the ranks. He doesn't have to go fight the next killers on their way up or fight people that he's already fought that are in the top of the division. I think it's all about having some fun, giving the fans what they want to see, and then, ultimately giving us some more vintage Izzy stuff that we can just clamor onto as he walks off into the sunset. So for me, scheduling wise, we're going off schedules, right? The perfect fight for him to make is the new up-and-coming, brand-new 185er that just made his 85 debut in the UFC last night, which is MVP. Now, MVP was at 170. I was hoping he'd come up to 185 just because there was some cool matchups for him up there. Turns out he does. Share a Bullet was the first test. He passed it with flying colors. I mean, that was a very impressive fight. But I think stylistically, the UFC could sell Israel Adesanya versus Michael Venom Page as the highest level striking match that the UFC's ever put on, that MMA has ever seen. And nobody would really question that. These two guys have such unique styles, very different from one another, but have had so much success against high-level fighters for years with their unique style. So that, for me, is the fight. Obviously, Imavov, his stock's going to continue to go up, and he's going to get more difficult fights. Maybe some people that Izzy's fought, Vettori, Robert Whitaker, these types of names. He's going to try to get his name with those. I think Israel Adesanya needs to go for the big fights that the people are going to love. Don't go out there and fight Robert Whitaker or Marvin Vettori or Paulo Costa again. Go out there and fight MVP. Put the fans first. Give us something we want to see, and that's the direction I think MVP and Israel Adesanya should go next. It's also the direction I think Imavov should go.
Yeah, I mean, I love the MVP versus Izzy fight. That is just would be a true high level striking chess match. Nobody really has any idea how that would go, what sort of game plans they would bring into it, what sort of wrinkles. Like that's where it's like, real recognize real, as they say.
Right.
Both guys recognize and respect the striking ability in each other, and I think they would try to bring it up even a couple of notches just to put on a show for the fans
and the pre-fight theatrics. Think about that. Izzy's been the guy, the performer on the walkout, the performer in the cage, and then the performer on the post-fight speech. MVP's just as good at all that stuff.
Yeah.
He's very unique. He's his character. People know him. They've got the anime people and all that sort of stuff behind him. So I think that's the kind of fight the UFC needs to make. Perfect 3-round feature bout on a pay-per-view. That would be perfect. Or
a 5-rounder main event for like a big fight night.
Yeah, a big fight night, that could work. But, usually they kind of reserve the fight nights for these up-and-comers. MVP's not exactly an up-and-comer. He's new to the UFC. He's new to the division and new to a lot of UFC fans. But he's still not an up-and-comer. So I don't know if they'll go 5 rounds. I think 3 rounds is all they need to do. Put them right there in the feature bout on some card this summer, and I think you can't miss.
Yeah, and the narrative that I'm seeing on X today and all over social media, I mean, at least the majority of it is Izzy's washed, Izzy needs to retire.
Yeah.
He's 1-4 in his last 5. Stop it with all that nonsense.
Yeah.
Like, Israel Adesanya is a multimillionaire.
Right.
If he wants to retire, then I'm happy for him.
Right.
Like, I appreciate the memories, and I've enjoyed watching his career. I think Izzy got a lot of hate that was completely undeserved. He was, at one point in time, he was the most professional, most active champion on the roster.
For sure.
Look at those 5 fights that you he's 1-4. Okay. Alex Pereira twice. Mm-hmm. The Sean Strickland fight, point taken. That was not a good fight for him. He had an off night. Also, who doesn't have an off night throughout an entire career, right?
Right.
Dricus fight, he looked pretty damn good in that fight. He was winning that fight until Dricus kind of overwhelmed him and ended the fight.
That's right.
Last night against Nassourdine, he looked like he was maybe a half a step back, but he didn't look like Tony Ferguson or BJ Penn.
Right, I mean, he certainly won more moments of the fight than Nassourdine did. Nassourdine just had the biggest moments.
He was winning a fight. He won the first round, which was the only complete round against a top 5 guy in the division. So to say that, like, everybody is so quick in this community, this MMA community, which I love, but sometimes we have to call the community out. Like, everybody's so quick to just say this person's washed. Like, Israel Adesanya is not even remotely close to washed.
Right.
There's a lot of fun fights. So Wonder Boy Thompson comes to mind.
Yeah.
As you said, MVP.
Share a bullet.
Yeah, exactly. There's some really fun fights that Izzy can have. And I think we need to respect these fighters that, like, aren't quite done competing, but they're probably done being the champion.
Right. Don't send them to the GFL. Let them have some fun in the UFC.
Right. Can you imagine what the GFL would pay Izzy? It would probably be astronomical. But, let him have some fun. He doesn't need to go beat DDP. He doesn't need to go up to 205 and beat Pereira. No. He needs to just enjoy the rest of his career. And I'm not saying that Izzy needs to fight for years longer. Like, I don't want to see him end up in the Tony Ferguson, BJ Penn category.
3 to 5 fights.
3 to 5 fights. Yeah, like even let's say 2 to 4.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's do an MVP. Maybe let's do a share a bullet. Maybe let's figure out something fun happens.
Send him to the grave with Bo Nickel.
There you go. Yeah.
Right? No.
Yeah, I mean, that is kind of the tradition. You always end up, face down and embarrassed to steal the words of Chael Sonnen. But
that's right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe Izzy's at that level yet. I don't believe Izzy needs to retire unless he wants to. But if he came out and said, I am done, I want to be done, because he said, I need to go reconfigure and see what I want to do.
Right.
So let's give him a few months. Let's let the man decide what he wants to do. But let's not call it a career for Izzy until he says it's time to call it a career.
I agree.